Hi everybody, TJ Mac Vintage Cards here, and today we're taking a trip back to 1977. It's the height of the disco era, as shown by movies like Saturday Night Fever that were released in December of that year, and went on to be the third highest grossing film of 1977. So you can attribute some of that to the popularity of disco, and some of that to John Travolta starring in it, who was a real popular actor at the time. And then you also had in May of that year Star Wars being released, which of course is one of the most iconic movies ever made and still popular to this day. So 77 was a great year for films. And then there was also Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which was another popular movie that came out in November that year that talked about aliens visiting Earth. It was one of the main plot lines in that movie. But it was also in 1977 that kids would frequent their local convenience stores to rip packs of 77 Topps baseball, football, hockey, and basketball as well. And I put the baseball, hockey, and football issues out here because there are a lot of similarities between these three issues. Basketball looked considerably different, I think, but the baseball, football, and hockey issues were very similar. First, I'll draw your eyes to these borders here on the football and baseball issues. They had these real thin borders on the bottom and on the sides that really allowed the image to take more real estate on the card, which I like, but it did make it tougher, I think, for collectors who covet centering and those who don't want miscuts, because you didn't really have as much room on the sides of those borders. Hockey had the thicker borders that we're more accustomed to. But the hockey card's similar in that the lettering is very similar on all three of the cards, with you see the Giants, Bills, and Canadians. Now in hockey, they used the logo very often in the 70s, where in baseball, they would only use it on the jerseys or depict it on the fronts of the caps of the players. And I found that interesting with baseball, and I talked about that in a video I did a while back, why they didn't use the logos more like hockey did. And of course, those who know football cards know in the 70s they didn't have the rights to put logos on the cards. But I think they did a nice job by using nice color schemes that allowed for you to not miss as much not having the logos on the cards, I think. And the 77 set in particular does a really nice job of that. As you can also see here, they have the banners on the cards depicting if they're all-star or an all-pro. And the baseball had them too, but they'd be on the bottom. And I didn't show one of those just because I wanted to show you how the cards would look when they didn't have that banner on there. And you can see, again, that it allows a lot of room for the picture to take over. So I just wanted to show that first, and now we'll dive into the football set. I do have quite a few graded cards from the 77 football set. I'm not going to show them all today, but I want to show you some of the ones that I like and that I want to speak to a little bit. But it is one of my designs that I'm really fond of because I like the action photography in the set. There were a lot of headshots and head and shoulder shots, which I don't mind those either, but I think 77 and 75 Topps have some of the finest action photography of any of the football issues of that time. So that's why those are two that I gravitate more towards than some of the other designs from that decade. But I am a big fan overall of Topps football cards, especially from 75 until 81, because they hold a lot of memories for me. So just really enjoy looking at those cards. So now we're going to flip it over to the back here, and you can see in 77 Topps they had this nice fuchsia color and pink there, and then in the upper left corner you can see the little football with the number inside it. And what Topps would do a lot of times is the 0 numbers would be reserved for the better players at that time, which O.J. Simpson certainly would have been. Talk about their college career on the bottom a little bit. O.J. Simpson went to USC, broke several records, won the Heisman Trophy as well in 1968, and talks about that there on the bottom of the card. And then you have the vital information and statistics listed on there as well. And Topps from that year issued a set of 528 cards, which was common for that era for football. And they came in 10 cards per a wax pack, 15 cents a pack. And in 77, what was interesting, they did have some 20-cent packs as well, because they were experimenting with raising their prices. And if you had boxes of the 20-cent packs, they command a premium over the boxes of the 15-cent packs in the market because they're rarer. So I just thought that would be interesting to share as well, just so you can get a little feel for how the packs were distributed in that era and the pricing. And they had cello and wax packs, or cello and rack packs as well at that time. These three cards here really show what I appreciate about the photography from that era, and this Roger Staubach, Fran Tarkenton, and Ken Anderson. And Roger Staubach that year led the Cowboys to the Super Bowl, and it would be the second Super Bowl under Coach Landry. Cowboys were 12-2 that year, and Staubach had another fantastic season, finishing third in touchdowns with 18, which is pedestrian compared to what quarterbacks do today. But remember, this is era-specific. This was a running era, but he was an elite quarterback that could play in any generation. He was second in passer rating with 87 that year, which was not uncommon for him because he was a very accurate passer, didn't throw a lot of interceptions for that time. And he was third in yards with 2,620 yards. And then next to him, you have this beautiful Fran Tarkenton card with the NFC All-Pro banner there with the purple and then the pink, and then it really goes well with his jersey, just a really sharp card. And then this Ken Anderson one's a fun one that I talked about in a video last year, where it shows him looking like he's almost got a Browns uniform on. The Browns had similar jersey colors in their history, but you can see here the Browns back then wore the orange pants and the white jersey. But they also had a jersey color very similar to that they wore as well. So it makes for a fun image to look at, in addition to just the great action photo there as well. So I wanted to show these three quarterbacks. I'm a sucker for the action photography of quarterbacks in the 77 set, and I find myself acquiring them to my collection just beyond the star quarterbacks, just because I'm so in love with the photography from that year. Here we have the three leading rushers from 1977. First, head and shoulders the best running back in the NFL at that time was Walter Payton. In 1977, he had 1,852 yards. He also broke the single-game rushing record that year, which has since been broken. He had 14 rushing touchdowns, 5.5 yards per carry, which is really incredible. And he won the NFL MVP that year, one of the best running back seasons of all time. And then next to him, you have the Mark Van Eeghan, who was second in the NFL that year with 1,273 yards. And then next to him is Lawrence McCutcheon, one of my favorite guys from that era, as I've talked about before. He was third in the NFL with 1,238 yards and also had 7 touchdowns. Now, Van Eeghan's an interesting card. I've talked about where I thought that was a Bears game where that photo was taken, but Wrigley Regular, is the name of the channel, his name's Russell. He thought it was from the Super Bowl, and when I did some additional research, it was from the Super Bowl with the Vikings because that number matched a player on the Vikings team, as you can see there on the sleeve in the picture. So I wanted to thank Russell for that. But what's also interesting about this card that I've talked about before is it doesn't have the 1,000-yarder designation on it, and Mark Van Eeghan ran for 1,012 yards in 1976, so they did not include that on the card. So I thought that was interesting, but as I've said in the video where I talked about it, I'm glad they didn't because I think it would have took away from the beautiful action shot. Here are 3 of the best receivers from that era: Steve Largent, Lynn Swann, and Cliff Branch. There were no 1,000-yard receivers in 1977. Drew Pearson led the NFL with 820 yards receiving that year. Again, just shows you the era that these players played in was not really a receiver's game back then. In fact, running backs led the league in receptions every year from 1975 to 1979, that's the only time that's ever happened in NFL history. But it goes to show you the difference between the passing game then and now, as I've said many times. But here's the Steve Largent rookie. Largent had 10 touchdowns that year, which was quite a few touchdowns for a receiver in a season then. And then Lynn Swann was top 5 in receiving yards as well. And then you have the All-Pro Cliff Branch, who I'm hoping gets into the Hall of Fame this year as well. Here are 2 of the best defensive tackles from that era, and Randy White and Joe Green. The Randy White card says middle linebacker, but he was converted to defensive tackle. And between these 2 outstanding players are 11 first-team All-Pros, 5 Super Bowls, a Defensive Player of the Year, a Super Bowl MVP, and that's just between these 2 players. And both, of course, are in the Hall of Fame. 2 players that I really enjoy collecting, just a couple of the greats of the game. There are so many great Steelers cards from this era. The Steelers, of course, were the elite team of the league, winning 4 Super Bowls in the decade. You got here first Mike Webster, 9-time Pro Bowler. This is his rookie card. He was a center and a Hall of Famer. He was the anchor of the Steelers' offensive line, a superb run blocker, but was also great at anticipating the pass rush. Terry Bradshaw said Mike Webster was the guy the offense leaned on. He was our strength. What a compliment to receive. And then also you have Jack the Hammer, Jack Ham there in the center. He was one of the greatest outside linebackers of all time. He was not as intimidating as Mean Joe Green or the man next to him, Jack Lambert, but he could play the pass and run as well as anybody. His 32 interceptions are third all-time amongst linebackers, and he was the glue of that Steeler steel curtain in my view. And then next to him you have, of course, the great Jack Lambert, who was one of the best players, I think, ever against defending the run. You couldn't fool Jack Lambert. He was super intelligent. Don't let those missing teeth fool you. And really one of the greatest middle linebackers of all time. He was not a big guy, but he was a tall guy, which gave him an advantage, I think, in seeing how plays were being set up. And he really just understood how offenses worked, which really made him a great player. And, of course, all 3 of these men are Hall of Famers. First 2 cards here are 2 of the greatest power backs of all time. John Reagan certainly took that role over in the 1980s. And then you have Larry Zonka, who was one of the best power backs of the early to mid-'70s. And then in between that, of course, you'd have the great Earl Campbell. And then on the end here, you have Franco Harris, another one of those great players from the Steelers dynasty. He was 4th in the NFL in rushing that year with over 1,100 yards. And, of course, in 76, he ran for over 1,000 yards, as depicted by the 1,000-yarder on the front of the card. And he was All-Pro as well in 1976. Here we have 3 of the best quarterbacks in the AFC during that time, representing the 3 powerhouse teams of the 70s and the Steelers, Dolphins, and Raiders. What I find interesting is from 1971 to 1984, the Steelers, Dolphins, and Raiders made every single Super Bowl except for in 1977 when the Broncos made it and 1981 when the Bengals made it. Every other year between 71 and 84, one of those 3 teams represented the AFC. That's really incredible when you think about it. And there were a few better than Terry Bradshaw, who won 4 Super Bowls, Bob Greasy, who had an excellent season in 1977, leading the league in passing yards and touchdowns. He had won a couple Super Bowls as well. And then, of course, the Snake Kenny Stabler, who won the Super Bowl in 1976 with the Raiders. Just love these 3 cards all depicted together because they really show the dominance of the AFC teams at that time in the Steelers, Dolphins, and Raiders. Last card I'm going to show today, I have the other rookies in this set. I'm just not going to show them all in this video. And Harry Carson and Mike Haynes and, of course, Leroy Selman. I have other plans for them for other videos. But I wanted to show Dave Casper, really one of the best all-around tight ends of that era and really all time as well. He could pass, he could block, he could catch, and he was just an exceptional route runner as well. He was known for the ghost in the post play in 1977 when the Raiders beat the Colts in the divisional round, and it was a 42-yard catch that Dave Casper made on a post play, so they call him the ghost in the post. His nickname was the Ghost because of a popular cartoon character of that era and Casper the Friendly Ghost, so they called him the Ghost because of that. And he was also part of the Holy Roller play that took place in 1979, which you can read about on your own time. I don't want this video to be too long, but I am a big fan of Dave Casper and just one of the great Hall of Famers and an outstanding representation of those excellent Raider teams of that era.